Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of the newspaper analysis from a civil service examinations perspective. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Delhi edition dated 11th June 2022. The topics to be discussed have been displayed on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. Our first topic is from page number 10. This topic is in relation to the nuclear energy and the topic reads, Russia delivers more efficient nuclear fuel for Kudankulam. This Kudankulam is a nuclear plant located in India. And this is the very context of this news article. Because recently Russia has delivered a quality, efficient nuclear fuel which is expected to increase the energy output on one hand and reduce the emissions on the other. That is why it is said that it is a more efficient nuclear fuel. And that is why the context of this article also mentions that this nuclear fuel will start the operations within an 18-month fuel cycle. Now the term 18-month fuel cycle, what does this exactly mean? Now the fuel cycle is the time period after which the fuel has to be replaced. Presently, the fuel which we use has a fuel cycle of 12 months, that is 1 year, which means that after every year the fuel has to be replaced. But this particular nuclear fuel, which is TVS-2M, has the fuel cycle of 18 months. That means the addition of 6 months extra. And that is where the efficiency of this particular fuel remains. Now coming to the UPSC scheme of syllabus, this topic finds mention in the General Studies Mains Paper 3 in the section of Economic Development as well as the micro section of Infrastructure, particularly the energy component. And this component is very important given the present context whereby we need that in the backdrop of rising industrialization and urbanization, our energy demand is going to increase. But this energy demand has to be met with some other energy sources which somehow also pollutes our environment. So basically the energy issue is related to the economy versus ecology debate. And such topics are very important from the mains examinations perspective. As you can also see that UPSC in 2018 mains directly asked the question on this very component in the context of nuclear energy. The question said that with growing energy needs, should India keep on expanding its nuclear energy program? Discuss the facts and fears associated with the nuclear energy. Now, if you closely analyze this particular aspect that you have to discuss the facts and fears, this means that the question is demanding out of you that you must be aware about the merits and demerits of the nuclear energy. In this very regard, in today's session, we are going to discuss some of the key facts related to nuclear energy. Then we will also look at the spread of the nuclear energy across India and the plants and their respective states. With the help of this chart, we will analyze what is the share of the nuclear energy in the total installed generation power capacity in India. And in the last, we will come to the analytical aspect whereby we will discuss the points which favor the nuclear energy as well as the points which lie against the use of nuclear energy. So now let us begin our discussion in a detailed manner. First of all, we need to understand that India is the only developing country having her own indigenously developed and deployed nuclear reactors. Further, India ranks third in the total electricity production globally. And when it comes to the number of nuclear reactors which we have, India stands at the 7th position globally. In this very line, we should be aware about the nuclear reactors and their states which are located in India. The questions can be asked in the form of match the pair following or correct or incorrect statements relating the nuclear power plant's name as well as state. So that is why with the help of this map, we will try to memorize the names of these plants and their respective states. First is the Rawat Bhata nuclear plant, and this Rawat Bhata lies in the state of Rajasthan. Second is the Kakrapar and Mithivirdi nuclear plants. Now both the Kakrapar as well as Mithivirdi lies in the state of Gujarat. Next comes Tarapur, which is in the state of Maharashtra, as well as Jaitapur, which is in the state of Maharashtra. The Kaiga nuclear plant is in the state of Karnataka. The Kudankulam nuclear plants, which is the context of today's news article, lies in the state of Tamil Nadu. Then we have Kalpakkam, also lying in the state of Tamil Nadu. Then we have Kovada, that is Kovada, lying in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Bargi nuclear plant lies in the state of MP. Haripur plant lies in the state of West Bengal. Narora is very famous nuclear plant lying in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And one of the upcoming plants, that is Kumharia, lies in the state of Haryana. Now Kumharia is going to be the first nuclear plant of the state of Haryana. Now the list of these plants, which is shown in front of you with the help of this map, includes the plants which are presently operational as well as those plants which are going to be established. For example, Rawat Bhata, Narora, etc., they are the operational plants, and Kumaria and Bargi are the plants which are going to be established in the state of Haryana as well as MP respectively. Now, in continuation of this, we will now understand the breakup of the various sources in the installed power generation capacity in India. As we all know, coal shares the maximum share even today, with having 51.1% of the total installed power generation capacity. And when it comes to the non-fossil fuel based energy generation, it is divided into two categories. One are the renewable sources, which also includes the hydro sources, and the second is the nuclear sources. Now the renewable sources, including the hydro sources, constitute around 39.2%, whereas the nuclear sources constitute around 1.7%. That is, it is less than 2%. And hence, the total non-fossil fuel based energy generation in India is somewhere around 41%, exactly to be 40.9%. Now, in this very line, we will now understand the merits and demerits, the views of proponents as well as opponents related to the nuclear energy. First, we will discuss the points which favor the nuclear energy. And in this line, the first and the foremost point is the rising energy demand. Now, the energy demand is rising on account of various factors, for example, industrialization, urbanization, economic growth, and the shortage of conventional fuels, for example, coal. You all are aware about this fact that recently we were facing the extreme coal crisis in India. And in all this backdrop, we need to look for different sources of energy generation. And nuclear energy is one of those potential sources which can supply us the power continuously for many years. If you closely analyze this graph, it shows the nuclear energy output in gigawatt units. In 2021, we were generating the nuclear energy to the tune of 6,780 gigawatts, which is expected to continuously rise by 2031 to the tune of 22,800 gigawatt. The second important point comes from the environment perspective. The nuclear energy plants are zero emission sources. Now, by zero emission, we mean that the amount of the heat which is generated out of this nuclear power plant is reused to heat up the water and generate the steam. This steam is then used to rotate the turbines. That is how the energy is produced out of a nuclear plant, and hence it does not provide any carbon emission. The third point is that nuclear power plants also have very low land footprint as compared to other renewable sources of energy. For example, when we compare it with the wind plants, to generate the same amount of energy, the land which is required to build a nuclear power plants is around 360 times lesser compared to the wind plants. Similarly, if we compare this with the solar plants, the amount of land required for nuclear plants is around 75 times lesser than the solar plants, provided the fact, obviously, if we have to generate the same amount of energy. Next comes the amount of the waste. Yes, we agree that nuclear plants generate radioactive waste, but the quantity, the amount of those wastes are very less. For example, the data shows that the total radioactive waste which is generated out of a nuclear plant operating for last 10 years can be fit in a football field. Now, the quantity of this is very less, and that is why the proponents believe that this waste can be managed. Next, the nuclear power plants also have several economic advantages. For example, it has low maintenance cost, it can boost the employment potential. Further, it can supply the sources of energy to the industries. And last, if we are able to generate surplus nuclear energy, we can also export it to the other countries and can generate revenue out of these reasons. The last important aspect related to nuclear energy is the strategic element. Now, because we all know that nuclear power is not just a tool for energy or war, it is also a political tool. The country which has nuclear energy generation capacity holds a very high significance in the global geopolitics. Now we will come to the opinions of the opponents to nuclear energy. The first is the radioactive waste which is generated out of these plants. Yes, we agree that the quantity of that waste is very less, but the threats to the health, biodiversity, as well as that whole entire region is so immense that it can wipe out the whole population if there are chances of nuclear leakage. Second is that if you are saying that nuclear energy have zero emission sources, why are we restricting to the nuclear plants only? Why are we not focusing on the entire supply chain of this nuclear industry? The raw material of this nuclear energy plants is the uranium which has to be mined. And if the uranium mining is taking place, there are issues of GHG emissions, there are issues of rock destabilization, which can also lead to large scale earthquakes in sensitive areas. The next point comes the energy recovery time. Now, what is this energy recovery time? It is the total time which is taken by some power plant to generate the net power. Now, what does this mean? Let us understand this with the help of an example. Suppose I have built this plant, and let us suppose that the total amount of energy which is required to build this plant is, let's say, 100 units. This energy can be in the form of like uranium mining. This energy can be used in the form to transport that uranium from the raw sites to the plants. So the point is that the total amount of energy which is spent to build this particular plant, let's say today, is 100 units. And once this plant gets ready, then it will start to generate its own power. Now let's say in first year it generated the power of 1 unit, in second year it generated the power of 5 units, then in third year it generated the power of 10 units. And then let us assume that it took around 20 years to generate the power 100 units. Now after 20 years it was able to recover all the energy which was used to build these plants. This means that the energy recovery time of this particular plant is 20 years. After 20 years it will be able to generate the net power. So that is why the opponents say the energy recovery time of the nuclear plants is very high. It is almost around 10 years. On the other hand, the energy recovery time of the wind plants is just around 1 year. The next point is related to the thermal pollution, because nuclear power plants are known to generate the water discharge which is used as a coolant in those plants, and those waters have very high temperature. Those are heated waters which if go to the streams directly, it can create the problem of thermal pollution, which in turn can decrease the dissolved oxygen content and hence can be dangerous to the aquatic life. Further, on the economic front also, these nuclear power plants are very capital intensive. Now their maintenance cost is lower, but the initial cost to build these nuclear plants are very high. And the last issue is the potential threats of nuclear disasters. How can we forget the Chernobyl incident? And therefore, the opponents believe that why are we investing so much in some particular power source where we cannot control if the disasters take place? Why not to invest all that money in the other renewable resources like wind, solar, hydro, etc.? So I hope that all the dimensions related to this particular topic is. This topic has appeared at page number 10 in today's The Hindu Delhi edition in the context of Russia supplying more efficient nuclear fuel to the Indian nuclear plant located in Kudankulam. In this very regard, we looked at certain key facts related to the India in nuclear power generation, and in this line, we discussed some important nuclear power plants with their respective states. We also discussed the share of various energy sources in the context of total installed power generation capacity. And in the last, we discussed the merits and demerits of the nuclear energy power. The points in favor were first, rising energy demand, second, zero emission source, third, low land footprint, fourth, minimal waste, fifth, economic advantages, and sixth, strategic dimensions. On the other hand, the points which are against nuclear energy is the nuclear waste, uranium mining leading to GHG emissions, high energy recovery time, thermal pollution, very high initial cost, and the potential threats of nuclear disasters. This topic has appeared at page number 6, and the topic reads the gulf of sensitivity that India will have to cross. This topic is in relation to the India and the Gulf countries relation, that is India and West Asian relationship. The recent context of this very news article is the objectionable statement which was made by BJP national spokesperson in relation to the Prophet Muhammad. There is a widespread controversy regarding that particular statement, and there have been several incidents of riots in Indian cities as well as a strong objection from West Asian countries, especially the Organization of Islamic Countries. In this very regard, from the examinations perspective, we need to be aware about the various interests which India share with the West Asian countries and why India has been considerate towards the objections which were raised by the West Asian countries. Because this topic falls under the section of international relations, that is why, as per the UPSC's scheme of syllabus, this topic lies under General Studies Mains Paper 2 in the section of bilateral, regional, and global groupings which affect the Indian interests. So, in this very line, we will discuss the importance of the West Asia for India. There are several areas of cooperation as well as mutual friendship which we should be aware about. The most important area of cooperation is the oil and gas. The West Asian countries as well as the North African countries contribute over 60% of India's total imports of crude oil and more than 85% of the India's LNG requirements. Among all these countries, Iraq is the largest supplier of crude oil to India. Before Iraq, Saudi Arabia was the largest supplier. But an important development has taken place in this very region, that because of the failure of the nuclear deal and consequent imposition of sanctions by US on Iran, the share of Iran's contribution to the India's oil needs has considerably reduced. And because of this, there has been a significant geopolitical turn in the India's foreign policies also. Nevertheless, India is still dependent on West Asian countries for its oil and gas requirements. Then the second important aspect comes the Indian diaspora which is living in the West Asian countries. And around 10 million Indians are living in the West Asian countries. As per the 2019 data, the Saudi Arabia constitutes the major share of Indian diaspora, followed by United Arab Emirates and then Kuwait. Now here again you should understand that the diaspora, despite the fact is in the foreign countries, still India is accountable for their protection. India collaborates with all those countries where there is a significant proportion of Indians living over there. And similarly, other countries also cooperate with India in order to protect their own citizens who are living in India. Now, diaspora has a very strong potential in the soft diplomacy. Diasporas are therefore called as unofficial ambassadors of any country. The third important aspect comes the remittances, which is a natural outcome of high diaspora living in West Asian countries. If we are having so much huge amount of people living in foreign country, then obviously they will be sending back the remittances to their family, loved ones, dear ones, or friends who are living in India. That is why, according to the World Bank report in the year 2020, India received around $83 billion in remittances, which was the highest in the world. And out of all these remittances, the majority of these remittances were from the West Asian Indian diaspora. As far as the country wise specific remittances are concerned, as per that report, India received the largest remittance from the UAE. Further, the importance of these remittances for a national economy can be understood by a simple fact that these remittances account for 3% of India's total GDP. Then comes the trade part. Now, by analyzing this particular graph, you can understand the tremendous potential in trade which India shares with the West Asian countries. For example, with UAE, India's trade is of the tune of around 60,000 million US dollars. Then comes the Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and almost with all the countries in West Asia, there is a very strong trade based cooperation, and India has huge interest in saving that trade. And in this very line, the next important component is related to the investment. The UAE India Infrastructure Investment Fund has pledged to invest around 75 billion US dollars in India's infrastructure projects like roadways, railways, airways, etc. Similarly, Saudi Arabia has also invested around $100 billion in India in sectors like petrochemicals, infrastructure, manufacturing, refining, and mining. And as far the latest development is concerned, UAE has again announced an investment of $7 billion in the food corridors which are to be developed in India. And last comes the foreign policies. We all are aware about the Look West policy of India, which is specifically focusing towards the Gulf countries. And India's Look West policy is complementary to the West Asian countries' Look East policy because we are to their east and they are to our west. So that is why both the policies are complementary to each other. And because of all these interests, that is the foreign policies, investments, trade, remittances, diaspora, and oil and gas based cooperation, India is considerate towards all the demands or objections which are raised by the countries of Gulf. And in this very regard, as we say, that the main principle of foreign policies is the national interest. And to safeguard our national interest, we design our foreign policies. And in this very line, we must understand the India's step towards all these objections. This topic has appeared in today's The Hindu Delhi edition in the editorial section and is in relation to the election of the next upcoming president. As we all know that the tenure of the present president is going to get over and hence the next president is to be elected. In this very sense, we should be aware about the election procedure and manner of India's president. As far as the syllabus is concerned, this is purely in the General Studies Paper 2 mains section, which mentions the micro section of appointment to various constitutional posts. Not only mains, in the preliminary examination also, this topic is very relevant. For example, in UPSC 2018, asked a question related to the election of president. The question said that, with reference to the election of the President of India, consider the following statements. 1. The value of the vote of each MLA varies from state to state. 2. The value of the vote of MPs of the Lok Sabha is more than the value of the vote of MPs of the Rajya Sabha. Between these two statements, you are asked to find the correct statement. You can find the answer to this particular question from our today's discussion, where we are going to discuss in detail regarding the constitutional provisions of election of the India's president. Article 54 of the Indian Constitution says that the electoral college is to be constituted to elect the president. And the composition of this electoral college is elected members of both the houses of parliament. Now, this is to be remembered, this is very important. Members of both the houses of parliament, that is Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha, take part in it. But not all the members of the houses of parliament take part. Only those members who are elected take part in these houses. That means nominated members do not participate in presidential election. Similarly, the elected members of the legislative assemblies of all the states and also of Delhi as well as Puducherry. So I am again repeating it. The composition of the electoral college consists of the elected members of both the houses of parliament, elected members of all the state assemblies, as well as members of Delhi and Puducherry. Now comes the tenure of the president. So this is mentioned in Article 56 of our Constitution. Article 56 says that the president shall hold office for a term of 5 years. So this means the tenure of a president is 5 years from the date on which he enters upon his office. However, there is one very important condition attached to this tenure. It says that notwithstanding anything, president continues to hold the office until his successor enters upon his office. That means, for example, because of certain reason, let's assume that the 5 years have passed of the present president, but the election for the next president has not taken place, or next president is not yet elected and he is not yet to enter upon his office. So until and unless the successor enters upon his office, the present president will continue to hold his office. It may be beyond 5 years also. However, generally the election of the next president takes place before the tenure gets over of the present president. It is mentioned in the Act. According to the Presidential and Vice Presidential Elections Act 1952, the notification calling to the election of the office of the president can be issued by the Election Commission on any day within the period of 60 days before the expiry of the term of the office of the outgoing president. That means that if the tenure of the present president is about to get over by 30th July, then within 60 months preceding this 30th July, that is 30th May to 30th July, Election Commission can conduct the election of the president. Article 324 of the Indian Constitution tells about the authority which can conduct the election to the office of president as well as vice president. And as per this article, the authority to conduct the elections to the office of president is vested in the Election Commission of India. Moreover, the election which we are talking about of the president takes place with the system of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote as well as secret ballot. Now let us come to the eligibility criteria of the president. Article 58 mentions the eligibility conditions to contest the election to the office of president. There are 4 conditions. First, he must be a citizen of India. Second, he must have completed 35 years of age. Third, he must be eligible to be a member of Lok Sabha. Now this is very important because in questions this word generally gets replaced by Rajya Sabha. So you need to remember that he must be eligible to be the member of Lok Sabha. And the fourth, he should not be holding any office of profit under the government of India or the government of any state. Now, office of profit is not defined by the Indian Constitution. However, the Constitution again says that the offices of the President, Vice President, Governor, Minister of the Union or any state will not be considered as office of profit, and the person who is presently at any of these posts is eligible to contest the elections. So I hope the eligibility criteria for the election of the president is clear to all of you. Now we'll move towards the manner of the election of president and the value of votes. First of all, we must understand that whenever general election takes place, one person has one vote. For example, if you vote, you will have one value. If I'll vote, I'll have one value. So one person has one vote. But same is not the case during the presidential elections. Because we have already discussed that in presidential elections, common people do not participate. Rather, they are the MLAs or the MPs who participate. So the vote given to every MLA or MP differ. And there is a specific formula to calculate the vote of one MLA as well as MP. For example, the value of one MLA is calculated as per this formula, that is, the total population of that very state of which the MLA belongs. It used to be divided by the total number of MLAs. So now, because the population of each state vary, that is why the value of MLAs of different states will also vary. That is very obvious. Now come to the value of the vote of MPs. The formula is total number of votes which are assigned to MLAs divided by total number of MPs. Now when MPs are to be considered, the value of the votes of MPs are to be considered, it remains same of Rajya Sabha MP as well as Lok Sabha MP. The reason being, the total number of votes assigned to the MLAs will remain same, as well as the total number of MPs including the Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha will remain same. So here the numerator and denominator are both same, and that is why the value of the MPs are same, but the value of the votes of MLAs differ because the population of every state differs. In this context, 84th Constitutional Amendment Act 2001 is very significant because it provided that until the relevant population figures for the census after the year 2026 is published, the population of the states for the purpose of the calculation of the value of the votes of presidential election shall mean the population as ascertained at the 1971 census. This means that in the numerator which we are talking, that total populations of the state, so the population of the state will not be considered as the present level of populations. It is to be considered the population levels as per 1971 census until and unless new census after the year of 2026 is published. Now come to the nomination stage. Before election, there is a nomination, and the candidates who intend to stand in the election is to be nominated. And that nomination has to be signed with the list of 50 proposers as well as 50 seconders. And these proposers and seconders can be anyone from the total of 4,896 members of the Electoral College. That is the total number of MPs and MLAs in India. And once the election is done, here first past the post system is not followed. For securing the victory, an important rule exists. The Election Commission totals up all the valid votes cast by the Electoral College through the paper ballots, and to win, the candidates must secure 50% of the total votes plus 1. So that means it is not just who has secured the maximum votes, whether it is 10% or it is 90%, he will be elected as a president. No. The winning candidate must secure 50% of the total votes casted plus 1. So this was all about the election of the president as well as the constitutional provisions. I hope you have understood all these provisions in a very good manner, and you will be able to produce and attempt correct answers in your real examination. This topic has appeared at page number 11 in today's The Hindu Daily edition and is in relation to the NATGRID. Now this term is very important from your prelims examination as well as your mains examination. And for this to understand, you should know that what exactly is NATGRID. But before coming to this, we should know that where does this topic falls. This topic falls under the General Studies paper 3 section in the micro section of internal security, because this topic mentions the cyber security and its prevention. Further, it also mentions the communication networks and roles of media and social networking sites in internal security challenges. Now, as we all are aware that internal security of India is a very complex phenomena because India is faced with multiple challenges, that is from within the borders as well as from outside the borders. And in order to effectively secure our countries, we need to analyze multiple informations, data from several sources. And that was one of the biggest reason that we were not able to do that and we faced the 2611 attack. So before coming directly to the NATGRID, first we should understand that what was the background why NATGRID was formed. Before 2611 attack, there was series of information and data which was with raw and multiple intelligence agencies. Those information was also passed to several agencies like Coast Guard, Navy and IB. Despite all this, we all know that the attack could not be averted. There was a simple reason for it. The reason was that Coast Guard was on red alert on the Gujarat coast, but because their queries were not answered in the real time, they were not on alert on the Mumbai coast. And as we know that the attack took place in Mumbai. There were several questions which were continuously being asked by the Coast Guard, but because of the absence of real time information update, there was no action taken on ground in Mumbai. And after that attack, the need was felt that we should have certain software or certain platform which can deal with the real time information and its dissemination. So here is where NatGrid comes into role. NatGrid is a counter-terrorism application tool to collate and disseminate the intelligence input, including the data from more than 20 citizen-centric databases to intelligence agencies. And all this thing is done in the real-time basis. Now this pictographic representation shows the function of NatGrid. Now NatGrid collects the data from the citizen-centric information database. NatGrid itself is not a database. Rather, it is just an application tool. It collects the data from sources such as UID, vehicle registrations, driving license, mobile call details, bank accounts, credit cards, stock exchange investments, train reservations, ITR data, passport, etc. And all this data is combined and collected by NatGrid, and then this data is disseminated on real-time basis to multiple agencies like NIA, CBI, IB, RAW, ED, Department of Revenue Intelligence, Military Intelligence, Naval Intelligence, and Defense Intelligence agencies. So you should know that NatGrid itself is not a database, it is just an application tool which collects the data from these sources and then send these data to all the investigative and intelligence. Now is the time for the question of the day. The question from yesterday's DNS is in front of you. With reference to the medicine patent pool, consider the following statements. 1. It has been set up by the WHO to deal with COVID-19 pandemic. 2. It encourages the patent holders to enter into non-exclusionary voluntary license agreements to ramp up the production of life-saving patented drugs. You have to find the correct statement out of the given two statements, and option B, that is 2 only, is the correct answer. The question of the day from today's DNS is in relation to the presidential election. There are two statements given. First, Article 54 talks about the tenure of the Indian president, which is 5 years. Second, Article 56 talks about the electoral college to be constituted to elect the president. You have to find the correct options out of the given codes. A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, D, neither 1 nor 2. So that's all for today. All the very best. Study hard.